Very good evening, the view. We're here at Uganda'S network trying to discuss the debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio is a measure that compares countries' debt portfolio with what it produces. And the same measure gives you, or it indicates to you the ability of the country to pay back that debt. As of now, the country's GDP or the country's debt is standing at 86.7 trillion. With me is Madam Christine Birinjira, who is the program manager at Uganda'S network. Together with her, we are going to make sense and explain to people what does it mean to have a bigger debt like this. A very good evening, Madam Christine. How's Uganda'S network at the moment?
Thank you. Good evening to all our viewers.
Yep.
Uganda'S network is a policy advocacy organization, and we were formed to lobby for debt relief in 1996.
Yeah.
And that was achieved. Uganda actually achieved relief in terms of debt, external debt,
Yep.
of course. But unfortunately, as the years move on, we see that we have again gone down the dangerous path of increased debt, and as we speak, our debt is currently at 86.6 trillion, like you rightfully note.
Let us first talk about that. If we keep on mentioning our debt increasing day and night, I remember last time we started at 87, now we're at 80, we started with 76, we are now at 86 point something. What does that mean to our country at the moment?
Well, simply put, if our debt is growing at such a high rate, that means the risk is extended to our service delivery.
Okay.
If, for instance, our budget for the next coming financial year, 23-24, is 52.7 trillion. But of that, our non-discretionary, which is the funds that are committed, that you cannot touch, in other words, committed to payment of debt, is 27 trillion. But the funds that you can touch as Parliament and distribute to your other sectors to run the business of this country is about 25.1 trillion.
Yeah.
That means that debt is taking a bigger share of our financial envelope.
I've been having some sorts of discussions with the people in government, especially from the Ministry of Finance. And they've been telling us that our debt stress, much as we call it a stress, but it is in the manageable measures. There's no reason why we should make an alarm of the country's debt at the moment. We are doing okay. And then we have civil society organizations. We also have some political actors who are saying, no, we are bad. But this is government that is telling us that we're okay when it comes to managing our debt portfolio.
Well, what we know as civil society is that we are not okay in terms of managing our debt, because like I've already painted the picture for you as an example, in the next financial year, our debt obligations or servicing our debt is going to take a bigger chunk of our resource envelope compared to servicing the rest of our sectors,
Okay.
our other services. As an example, we have quite a number of frameworks and guidelines that should help us as a country in managing our debt. And these were, of course, set up by government, by the different, especially the Ministry of Finance.
Okay.
For instance, we have the Public Debt Management Framework 2018, and these set thresholds beyond which we should not go as a country. Take an example. While the Public Debt Management Framework says for your interest payments, domestic interest payments to revenue should not go beyond 12%. If they go beyond 12%, the money that you're collecting as URA the money that is going to pay your domestic debt interest payment, if it goes above 12%, that means you're now taking away money that you should leave within the economy to help, the country run, the economy run.
Yeah.
But now we're at 19%. For generally both domestic and external debt, the money from your resource envelope, from maybe URA, that should be going to pay that interest should not be more than 15%. But we are at 22%. So if we are exceeding and flouting these thresholds,
Okay.
government had actually foreseen that beyond this, you'll be getting into red, and we have already crossed them. So we need to see ourselves get back on that road if we are to sustain our debt, but also to have it under manageable levels.
I want to ask one question. Like I said, I always talk to government, people in government, especially from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics and then from the Ministry of Finance. They're saying, but NGOs also, you make people feel as if the country doesn't belong to them. For example, you come up with figures which make people feel like the country is going into, I don't know how even to mention it. People feel like the government is going to die anytime from now because of debts. And yet, if they compare Uganda or the country Uganda with other African countries, they are even worse than us. Yes.
So, well, I don't know why or where the government gets that from, because as civil society, the figures and the statistics that we use are all from government. The statistics we use, for instance, the debt, our debt as a country, the 86.6 trillion, is from the Bank of Uganda report.
Statistics, yes.
It is. The debt to GDP ratios are from Ministry of Finance. What I'm quoting, the Public Debt Management Framework, Ministry of Finance. So what we do is just to just bring out these figures to the public and then explain to them what it means, what's the impact if we continue on this path.
So I was asking you, Madam Christine, that we are going to talk about the National Development Plan 3s. We started with 1, 2, 3, now we're at 3. But according to government, National Development Plan Authority, they're saying it's the performance of National Development Plan 3 is only 17%. What does that mean?
Yeah, precisely our concern as well, because the National Planning Authority came out and did the midterm review, like you correctly say, and says our performance is at 17% as a country. But remember, the National Development Plan is our plan as a country that we present and say this should deliver us to maybe a certain goal.
Okay.
We should have achieved this in the next 5 years. But when we see that we are at 17% midterm, for instance, our debt from the beginning of the National Development Plan 3 has grown from 57 trillion to 86 trillion. We want to think that maybe the debt that has been acquired during that time, most of it has been put into servicing our economy, for instance. But that has not been so, and that is what we are telling the population, not trying to alarm them, but to tell them that, look here, out of the 69 projects, maybe the capital projects that had been planned under NDP 3 to deliver us to maybe to improve our economy and have us, but we are only on course with 6 projects, meaning that about 63 over 60 projects are not on course. If we have planned, for instance, in this current financial year, we had planned for 11 projects, to finance 11 projects in the NDP 3. But by December, last year. That was half year.
Yeah.
We had not put resources or made any release in favor of those projects.
But
The
Madam
Karuma.
Christian, can a country move without going for loans?
Well, what we always say here as at UDN, and indeed as government, borrowing is not bad.
So,
Borrowing is not bad, and what we push for is responsible borrowing, though. We can always borrow, but we do not want to borrow without, without having a plan why we are going to use these resources. But as we also borrow, even when we have a plan, how do we manage these resources that we are borrowing?
is that what
For
you call
example?
responsible borrowing?
Exactly. We want to see us borrow responsibly.
Okay.
For instance, I'll share with you a report that the World Bank produced. That was way back in 2016. But they said that for every capital infrastructure that we spent $1 on as Uganda, we were able to generate about 7/10 of a dollar. That is even less than what you put in. And that is because of corruption, right? But for the US, even before 2001, for every $1 that they injected in their capital infrastructure, they were able to generate about $6 worth. So you see the difference.
Let me tell you this.
So we are borrowing.
There's one time when I went to Uganda Bureau of Statistics and we had a conversation with the ED, that's Dr. Chris Mukiza.
Yes.
And he was like, Ugandans followed so much World Bank statistics and you feel all whatever they produce is okay. You don't want to follow the statistics of WOBOS, which is, they say the World Bank people are there in their countries, and why should we follow their statistics and leave what so that was also a concern from him. So he thinks maybe what comes from World Bank is
But government has not come out to clearly tell the public that please, these statistics of World Bank are misleading, because we see government following that. The debt to GDP thresholds, the one for East Africa and for Uganda indeed, that is by the World Bank. So if we are to, and I think one of the reasons that we always have to follow, because Uganda is not independent, we are dependent on each other as countries, and like I had earlier told you, since we borrow from the World Bank under the IDA window, we are also assessed, by the World Bank. There's what they call, there's a diagnostic tool they call the CPIA. That is the Country Policy Institutional Assessment. So as they give you their loans, yeah, and of course for them they give us concessional loans, which are cheaper of course, and grants as well. They always assess to see how much of these loans and grants should they extend to you. For instance, last year for Uganda we were assessed, but there is one of the parameters that they assess on transparency, accountability and corruption.
okay.
We were under average, we were under the borrower's average, while we were at about 2.5 and the borrower's average was 2.9. Yeah, so such ratings also impact on the amounts and the level of concessional lending or borrowing that you get from the World Bank. So if you have your maybe corruption cases and scandals and in the country, I'll just maybe talk about the Mabati scandal. It's the one that is still fresh. What they will do is they will follow up. To what extent are you bringing these public officials, MPs, government officials, ministers, to what extent are they being brought to book? For instance, are they being taken to court? Are they being made to pay? How are their cases?
Are we recovering the money?
Exactly. So if they don't see that happening, then that also impacts on the level of concessional borrowing that you get from them. And remember, our concessional borrowing has now gone down. While it still forms a bigger part of our loans, but it has gradually decreased from about 74% in 2017 to now 62. We are, I think, at around 62%.
I have a concern. Yesterday, we were at Uganda Revenue Authority. There's a concern that most of the Ugandans don't like pay tax. And we all know that through paying tax, it's a one way of reducing the burden of borrowing from different countries. But I think even Ugandans are not willing to pay tax, and that's why maybe we're not hitting the target somehow, somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you think even Ugandans as people also have a problem?
Well, I wouldn't rush to say that Ugandans have a problem, Pedison, because even at a personal level, look at it. If I am giving you my money and I do not see any value that comes from that money, why should I keep paying you? So while we want to credit, by the way, you are
building roads, hospitals. That's what they told us. That's at least roads and hospitals.
But we do not see this infrastructure, the roads,
electricity,
the potholes. No, you see, Pedson. Yes. What we are seeing, well, URA has actually performed. It has tried to perform its best. It has brought as much as possible more numbers into the taxable bracket. But what is happening with the money that we are collecting from URA? I've told you, URA is going to collect 29 trillion from 25 this coming financial year. But none of that is going to finance service delivery. Actually, the money for financing service delivery as a country is reducing. All that is going to debt obligations. But even as it goes to debt obligations, we see, for example, our domestic arrears as a country continue to grow at now 7 trillion from 4 last financial year.
I know.
Yes, and how much of this are we going to pay in this coming financial year's budget? Less than 500 billion. So I mean, if you're not going to pay national water, why shouldn't national water disconnect the hospitals, like what we've been seeing? But now if I cannot, as a Ugandan, go to the hospital and get a good service, why? I'm not discouraging payment of taxes. Of course, we should all pay our taxes.
Okay.
But we also want to see our worth, the worth that we are paying for. So if I am paying my taxes, I want to receive good services from my hospital. I want to move on a road that does not have potholes. But if we are paying taxes, maybe people are discouraged because they are paying taxes. They do not see maybe improved service delivery. That is probably why people are dodging their taxes.
But now, as Christine, do you see the problem that this debt burden going down at some point, maybe, if they follow the advices that you people are giving them, or you people are giving government?
Well, of course, what we advise government is for the best. I hope and I think they also know and see this. But it takes will. It takes the willingness of government, the political will, the technical will, to sit back down and say, well, we have put in place these frameworks, and we have digressed from them. Let's get back to them. Maybe say there's a lot of corruption, for example. Let's try to curb this and free resources that we can, we always give them advice. For example, there's a revenue mobilization strategy, for example, by Ministry of Finance, which they put out in 2020. But from the time they put this out, how far, to what extent have they supported, for instance, the local government to tailor their strategies as well to this national revenue mobilization strategy? That's one of the things. But two, we are also encouraging government to try as much as possible and bring this revenue collection, especially by the local governments, make it easy. I mean, things are going easy. If we reduce the human touch, in this collection process, and That also helps with corruption, with dealing with corruption. But even as we advise government on how to improve and strengthen their mobilization strategies, like we had already talked about the rationalization, free some resources, we also want to emphasize that this will be useless if we don't plug the loopholes, the holes that are existing, the corruption, for example, where we see the resources leaking. So we want to see us plug these holes in the area of corruption, as well as increase the revenue mobilization.
Thank you, Madam Christine Berenjira. That's Madam Christine Berenjira from Uganda'S Network. These are some of the advices that we are giving us, both CSOs and other government stakeholders. They're saying this is the time we should work on corruption. This is the time we should invest where we expect some money or some income that will help to grow this economy. And I've been doing so. Let's get back to the studios.